Get out of our lives and keep that God-forsaken farm. Well, folks, that's what my daughter-in-law announced at my husband's will reading, right after she and my son inherited $2.5 million. I took it in silence, holding on to my grief and the only inheritance they thought I had. Little did they know, what my husband really left me could have them coming back on their knees, begging. I'm Clara, 72 years young, an artisan from right here in Arizona, and this is the story of how I found my own worth in the ashes. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, settle in, and stick with me on this journey, because every one of us has a hidden strength just waiting to be awakened. The air in Scottsdale on an October morning usually has this clean, crisp kind of beauty to it, with that honey gold light pouring over the Camelback Mountains in the distance. But on that day, as the taxi carried me to the glass and steel office building where my son, Kevin, worked, I didn't have the heart to notice any of it. Everything through the cab window was a blur, colorless, like an oil painting someone had carelessly spilled water on. It had been 3 days since we buried Walter, my partner, my rock, the man who'd walked with me through more than 50 autumns. 3 days, but the ache in my chest was still raw, stinging like salt rubbed into an open wound. The building shot straight up into a cloudless blue sky, proud and imposing a world completely foreign to me. It was a world of numbers, of contracts, of negotiations that Tiffany, Kevin's wife, always boasted she was a master of. I stepped out of the car, my feet feeling as heavy as lead. The black dress I'd been wearing since the funeral felt like a second skin, wrapped tight around my sorrow. The young receptionist in a sharp suit gave me a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice as smooth and even as a machine, "the Davies law firm is on the 42nd floor. They're expecting you." The elevator whisked me upwards in silence, leaving the glittering city below. With every floor we passed, my stomach twisted into a tighter knot. I wasn't afraid of heights. I was afraid of the coldness I knew was waiting for me. A coldness that didn't just come from my loss, but from a bad feeling that had been creeping into my mind for days, every time I caught Kevin's evasive glance or Tiffany's unreadable smile. Mr. Davies's office was a space of quiet power and wealth. The mahogany floors were polished so bright I could see my own distorted reflection in them. The walls were hung with expensive abstract art, and a massive plate glass window framed the entire valley below, a majestic natural painting captured like a trophy. The air smelled of a mixture of leather from the armchairs, old paper, and some kind of fancy men's cologne. It was suffocating. Kevin and Tiffany were already there. My son, the boy whose nightmares I'd stayed up all night to soothe, was now a man in an expensive suit, looking fidgety and uncomfortable. He sat ramrod straight in his chair, his hands clasped together on his knees, his eyes fixed on some invisible spot on the Persian rug. He couldn't meet my eyes. A silent knife twisted in my heart. Tiffany, on the other hand, was perfectly at ease. She sat with her legs crossed, a designer navy blue dress clinging to her perfect figure. She was casually examining her freshly manicured nails with a look of dramatic boredom, as if this was just some play she was forced to sit through. Her blonde hair was swept up in a flawless bun, without a single stray hair. Tiffany was a work of art, a masterpiece of control and ambition. She looked up as I entered, a quick smile flashing across her bright red lips. "Oh, Mother Clara," she said, her voice like honey laced with poison. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Walter was a wonderful man." Such empty words. I just nodded, not having the strength to reply. I sat down in the chair across from them, the cold leather seeping through my thin dress. The space between us across that vast mahogany desk felt like an uncrossable chasm. Mr. Davies, a man in his 60s with silver hair and horn-rimmed glasses, entered the room. He carried a thick file and wore the solemn expression of a man accustomed to witnessing family tragedies. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and steady. "We are here today to execute the final wishes of Walter Morrison. My deepest condolences to the family." He sat, put on his glasses, and began to read. His voice was a monotone drone, emotionless, as it moved through the complicated legal terms. I heard my name, Kevin's name, Tiffany's name, even the names of distant relatives Walter had always kept in touch with. My mind went blank. All I could think about was Walter. I remembered the evenings we'd spent on our porch, him talking about our retirement plans. We were going to travel. We'd go to Italy, where I'd always dreamed of seeing Bernini's sculptures. We'd spend more time in the workshop, making jewelry together, combining his knowledge of geology with my artistry. We have enough to live comfortably for the rest of our lives, Clara, he'd said, his warm hand covering mine. I've taken care of everything. And therefore, the residence at 85 Silverleaf Drive, Scottsdale, along with all its furnishings and effects, shall be transferred to my son, Kevin Morrison, and his wife, Tiffany Morrison. Mr. Davies's voice pulled me back to the present. My ears were ringing. The house, the home Walter and I had built together, choosing every brick, planting every tree in the garden with our own hands, the home where Kevin grew up, filled with laughter and tears, the place where I had cared for Walter in his final days. I glanced at Kevin. He still hadn't moved, but I could see the muscle in his jaw clenching tight. Mr. Davies continued, turning a page. The entire stock portfolio held at the brokerage firm of Charles Schwab, all individual retirement accounts, and the balances of all bank accounts, after all necessary expenses are settled, shall be divided equally between Kevin Morrison and Tiffany Morrison. A number was read aloud, $2.5 million. I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. That was our life savings. The fruit of all of Walter's years of hard work, of all the late nights I'd spent finishing jewelry orders. It was the future we had painted together. Tiffany shifted slightly. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. She raised a hand to smooth a wisp of hair, a gesture that tried to look casual but was filled with triumph. I could feel the blood rush to my face, hot and stinging. Finally, Mr. Davies said, his voice hesitating just a bit, as if even he found what came next to be awkward. To my beloved wife, Clara Morrison. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe Walter had set something aside for me, a trust, some special provision I hadn't understood. I leave the full ownership of the Dusty Creek Ranch in Flagstaff, Arizona, including the house and all outbuildings on said land. Silence fell over the room. A heavy, suffocating silence. The Dusty Creek Ranch. The arid piece of land Walter's father had left him. It was where Walter did his geological research, where he collected his rough stones. We only went up there on weekends sometimes. The old cabin, the dusty workshop. It was a place of memories, of passion, but it was never a real asset. Compared to the Scottsdale home and millions of dollars, it was nothing short of a cruel joke. I looked at Mr. Davies, searching for an explanation, for some kind of mistake, but he just looked down at his papers, avoiding my gaze. It was then that the silence was broken, not by a word of comfort, but by a dramatic sigh from Tiffany. She leaned back in her chair and rolled her eyes with theatrical flair. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, her tone a mix of irritation and fake pity. "Well, I suppose that's that. Mother Clara, listen." She leaned forward, propping her elbows on the table, her long fingers intertwined. "I think this is for the best. You just hold on to that old ranch. It's more your speed, anyway. You can focus on your little crafts. You can just stay up there and make your little trinkets. The fresh air will do you good." Every word she spoke was a needle prick. Little trinkets. My life's work, my passion, the art I had dedicated my life to, was just little trinkets in her eyes. She went on, her voice becoming sickeningly sweet. "Really, you should feel lucky. You won't have to worry about managing complicated assets or any of those headaches. Just leave all that to us. You just need to move up there, live a quiet life. Don't you worry about us anymore, and just stay out of our lives." Stay out of our lives. The words hung in the air, cold and brutal. So that's what I was. A burden, a nuisance. The mother who had given up her youth, who had put her own artistic career on hold to raise and care for her son, was now just an obstacle in his path. I turned to Kevin. This time I wouldn't let him look away. I stared right into his eyes, the same blue eyes as his father, but now they were empty and cowardly. I pleaded with my gaze, begging him to say something, to defend his mother, to say Tiffany was wrong, to say I was still part of their family. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. A war was being fought on his face. Finally, he spoke, but his words hurt more than his silence ever could. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper, maybe this is for the best. You and Tiffany never really got along anyway." Never really got along. He said it as if it were some petty squabble between two women, not Tiffany's systematic campaign to push me out of my own son's life for the past 10 years. Every gift I gave my grandchildren was deemed unsuitable. Every piece of advice I offered was dismissed as old-fashioned. Every hug I gave was called suffocating. And Kevin, he had just stood by, watched it all, and done nothing. A numbness spread through me. The tears I had been fighting back all morning seemed to freeze in my ducts. I felt a terrifying emptiness. The husband I loved was gone. The son I had sacrificed everything for was now a stranger wearing his face. The family I had spent a lifetime building had crumbled right before my eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I understand," I said, surprised at how calm I sounded. I stood up, my legs feeling shaky and not quite my own. I picked up my purse. "I'll get my things." Tiffany smiled, a victor's smile, a smile that would haunt my sleep for many nights to come. "Good, Mother Clara," she said, getting up and smoothing her wrinkle-free dress. "When you're packing, be sure to take all the old photos and knickknacks with you. We're planning on redecorating the whole place anyway." Old photos and knickknacks. 40 years of memories, of smiling faces, of trips and milestones, all reduced to clutter in her eyes. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of that room, out of their lives. I could feel Kevin's eyes on my back, full of guilt but not enough courage to act on it. I walked past the receptionist, into the elevator, and out of that glittering building feeling like a ghost. I hadn't just lost Walter. That day, I lost everything. I had been erased from my own life, as efficiently and cruelly as someone wiping dust off a shelf. And as I stood on that Scottsdale sidewalk under the blazing sun, I knew that the woman named Clara Morrison, Walter's wife, Kevin's mother, had died in that room on the 42nd floor. Someone else would have to be born from those ashes. The drive to Flagstaff was a blur, woven from silent tears and a paralyzing sense of disbelief. The I-17 stretched out before me like an endless gray ribbon, cutting through Arizona's rugged landscape. The scenery slid past my old sedan's window, saguaro cactuses reaching for the sky like skeletal fingers, barren hills the color of rust, but I saw none of it. My mind was still trapped on the 42nd floor, tormented by Tiffany's triumphant smirk and Kevin's cowardly silence. Packing up the house had happened in a ghostly quiet. Kevin never came. He didn't call, didn't send a single text. It was as if, after the will reading, I had truly vanished from his world. It was just me and the strangers from the moving company, hired with the last of the money from my personal account, silently hauling the boxes I had packed myself. Every item I placed in a box was a memory being sealed away. The worn wedding album, Walter's collection of jazz records, my first ceramic pieces from college. Everything that defined our life in that house was now reduced to anonymous cardboard squares. As I drove away from Silverleaf Drive for the last time, I glanced up at our bedroom window. I saw Tiffany's silhouette standing there, her arms crossed. She didn't wave. She just stared, her face showing nothing but the cold satisfaction of someone who has just removed an obstacle. I hit the gas and didn't look back. The Dusty Creek Ranch was about 40 miles outside of Flagstaff, tucked away down a dirt road that probably hadn't been graded since Walter's father was alive. My car bounced and rattled over the potholes, red dust coating the windshield. I wondered if this is what exile must feel like, driving toward the edge of the world while everything you knew faded in the rearview mirror. The sun was setting when I finally arrived. The western sky was ablaze in shades of orange, purple, and pink, a beauty so heartbreaking it hurt to look at. But that beauty only highlighted the ranch's decay. The two-story cabin looked even more run-down than I remembered, the white paint peeling off in huge flakes to reveal the gray, weathered wood beneath. The front porch sagged on one side, and the swing Walter had always promised to fix for me still hung by a single chain, swaying eerily in the slight breeze. This was my home now, not by choice, but by the cruel decree of what was once my family. The key was right where Walter always kept it, under a loose floorboard on the porch step. As I turned it in the lock and pushed open the heavy door, a wave of stale, musty air hit me, carrying the smell of old wood, dust, and neglect. Inside, everything was dark. I fumbled for a light switch. The weak yellow glow from the living room's single bulb illuminated white sheets draped over all the furniture, making them look like silent, waiting ghosts. Every step I took on the wooden floor produced a mournful creak that echoed in the dead silence. I sank onto a sheet-covered armchair, sending a cloud of dust into the air that made me cough. And then, the dam I'd been building inside me for days finally broke. I began to cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd shed at the funeral or in the lawyer's office. These were gut-wrenching sobs, a silent scream clawing its way out from the deepest part of my soul, from a place that held too much loss. I wasn't just crying for Walter. I was crying for the son I had lost. I was crying for the grandchildren I would probably never see grow up. And most of all, I was crying for myself, for the woman who had spent her entire life building a family, only to find its foundations were made of sand. That first week at Dusty Creek nearly broke me. I'd wake up each morning to a thick, oppressive silence, a silence so complete it felt like the world had forgotten I existed. There was no sound of Walter's coffee maker gurgling, no murmur of the morning news on the TV, just the whistle of the wind through the cracks in the walls and the steady creak of the old windmill outside my window. Loneliness was a physical presence. It sat with me at the dinner table, followed me through the empty rooms, and lay beside me in the cold bed. To keep from sinking into despair, I threw myself into cleaning. It was both a desperate necessity and a form of therapy. I pulled off the dusty sheets, letting sunlight hit the old furniture for the first time in years. I scrubbed every square inch of the floors, washed every grimy window pane. The hard physical labor gave my grief something to focus on, a temporary distraction from the pain that was eating me alive. And as I wiped away the layers of grime, I started to realize I wasn't just cleaning a house. I was uncovering a part of Walter I never knew. The upstairs bedroom, which had been Walter's as a boy, was a little museum of his childhood. Old posters of constellations were still tacked to the walls. But what surprised me was a carefully sealed glass case displaying a collection of Native American arrowheads. Walter had never told me he was interested in archaeology. In over 50 years together, I only knew he loved stones, gemstones, not historical artifacts like these. His father's study, which Walter had left untouched, was another world entirely. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves overflowed with books on geology, mineralogy, and the history of mining in Arizona. On the desk, beside old topographical maps, were wooden trays of carefully labeled rock samples: quartz, malachite, azurite. Again, I felt a pang of distance. I knew my husband was a geological engineer, but I'd never truly understood the depth of his passion. He rarely spoke about his work in detail, maybe because he thought it would bore me. Or was there another reason? The biggest discovery, however, came from the last place I expected, the kitchen. Behind a loose board in the corner of the food pantry, I found an old, rusted tin box. My hand trembled a little as I pried open the lid. Inside wasn't money or jewelry, but something far more precious, the relics of a forgotten love story. A bundle of old letters was tied with a faded blue silk ribbon. The handwriting was elegant and feminine, written in a graceful cursive. They were in Spanish, a language I couldn't read, but I could make out the names and dates. Mi querido Samuel, my dearest Samuel, and dates from the 1940 seconds. Samuel was Walter's father's name. Beneath the letters were a few black and white photographs. A beautiful young woman with thick dark hair, big eyes, and a radiant smile. She was standing next to a young man I recognized instantly as a younger version of Walter's father. They looked so happy. In one photo, they stood hand in hand in front of what looked like the entrance to a mine. I sat down at the old kitchen table, the afternoon sun slanting through the dirty window, casting dusty beams of light on the photos. Who was this woman? Why had Walter never told me about her? I knew Walter's mother, Kevin's grandmother. She was a different woman, someone I'd met a few times before she passed. I couldn't sleep that night. The image of the mysterious woman and those Spanish words haunted me. There was only one person in town who might have the answers. The next morning, I drove into Flagstaff and went straight to Ruth Peterson's house. Ruth was in her 80s, but her mind was as sharp as a tack, and she was a walking encyclopedia of local history. She had been friends with Walter's mother and had always been kind to me, even after Tiffany started spreading her poison about me in Scottsdale's high society. If anyone knew the secrets of Dusty Creek, it would be her. I told Ruth everything I had found. She listened intently, her eyes shining with a look of remembrance. When I showed her the photographs, A soft smile touched her lips. "Oh, sweet Elena," she said, her voice gentle. "I haven't seen a picture of this child in a long, long time. What a beautiful, strong girl she was." "Elena?" I asked. "Elena Vargas," Ruth confirmed. "She was the great love of Samuel's life. You know, their story was the talk of this little town back in the day. A girl of Mexican heritage, her family had been miners here for generations. Samuel met her when he came out here to do geological surveys before the war. They fell head over heels in love." "So what happened to them?" I asked, my heart beating a little faster. Ruth sighed. "The war happened. Samuel had to go fight. When he came back, he married Elena. Despite his family turning their noses up at it, they had a short, happy time together. Elena, she knew this land, knew what was buried deep in the earth. She told Samuel that his family's ranch wasn't just farmland, it was a treasure chest." "A treasure chest?" "That's right," Ruth nodded. "Samuel was always obsessed with finding minerals. He believed there was a major vein of turquoise and silver running under the ranch." Elena confirmed it. She said her father and grandfather had known about it for years. Together, they made plans, drew up maps, filed for the mining rights. She paused, her eyes looking off into the distance. But then, tragedy struck. Elena died giving birth to their first child. The baby didn't make it either. Samuel was completely broken. He became quiet, withdrawn, almost a hermit. He kept digging, kept searching, as if doing so could somehow bring Elena back. But eventually, he gave up. A few years later, he remarried Kevin's grandmother. It was a loveless marriage, just an arrangement really, and the story of Elena and the treasure mine, well, it was slowly forgotten. I sat in silence, trying to process this incredible story. Turquoise and silver, mining rights, a tragic love story. It was all buried in this family's past. No wonder Walter never wanted to sell the ranch. Too many memories, he'd always said. Now I understood. They weren't his memories, they were his father's. But why had Walter hidden it from me? Why had he never told me the truth about this land's potential, even when we were struggling to make ends meet? Driving back to the ranch, my mind was a whirlwind. But in the middle of that chaotic storm of emotions, a new feeling began to sprout. It wasn't quite hope, not yet. It was more like curiosity, a sense of purpose. This ranch was no longer a place of exile. That night, for the first time in days, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, and when I woke up, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I was going to turn this house upside down, not to clean it, but to search for the real Morrison legacy. Ruth's story about Elena and Samuel had lit a fire in me. It wasn't a big enough fire to warm the loneliness, but it was bright enough to burn away the fog of despair. I no longer saw this house and this land as a life sentence. Now, they were a giant puzzle, an encrypted inheritance that Walter, for some reason, had left for me to solve. The next few days, I became an archaeologist, a detective in my own home. My cleaning was no longer random. Every room, every dark corner, every object was examined with intense focus. I started in Samuel's study, a room I'd only glanced through before. This time, I didn't just look at the books on the shelves. I took each one down, flipping through every page, hoping to find a hidden note, a tucked-away map. It was painstaking and, at times, discouraging work. Most of the books were just books, but I had the patience of a jeweler, honed over decades. I knew that to find a precious gem, you have to sift through tons of rock and dirt. And then, my persistence paid off. In a thick, heavy volume titled Mineral Geology of the Arizona Region, published in 1938, I found it. It wasn't a letter, but notes, handwritten in pencil in the margins. It was Samuel's handwriting. The notes were dense in the chapter about the formation of turquoise and silver veins. He'd drawn little diagrams, jotted down coordinates, technical terms I didn't fully understand, but a few words kept repeating. Main vein, estimated depth, high quality. On the very last page of the book, on the blank flyleaf, was a rough, hand-drawn map of the Dusty Creek property, with a wavy line marked with X's at several points, and underneath, a single, scrawled sentence. Elena was right. It's right under our feet. My heart was pounding. This was it, the first piece of proof. Samuel hadn't just believed Elena, he had researched it, surveyed it himself. I carefully used a utility knife to slice the page out of the book and tucked it away like a treasure. Next, I turned my attention to his heavy oak desk. The drawers were mostly empty, holding just a few old pens and rusted paper clips, but I noticed the bottom drawer seemed shallower than the others. I tapped on the bottom. The sound was a mix of solid and hollow. Using all my strength, I yanked the drawer completely out of its housing. Just as I suspected, there was a false bottom. Beneath the thin layer of wood was a secret compartment. Inside, wrapped carefully in a piece of oilcloth to protect it from moisture, was a folder of documents. My hands shook as I opened it. These weren't scribbled notes. These were official papers. There were copies of applications for mineral rights filed with the Bureau of Land Management in Samuel Morrison's name, dated from the 1942. There were letters exchanged with other geologists, and, most importantly, there was a set of assay reports on ore samples, conducted by a lab in Phoenix. The reports confirmed the presence of copper, silver, and especially turquoise in commercially significant quantities. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the yellowed papers of the past. Ruth's story wasn't some romantic legend, it was the truth. This ranch was, quite literally, a gold mine or a turquoise mine. Samuel and Elena had known, and they had tried to make it a reality, but war and tragedy had buried it all. But the biggest question of all remained, what about Walter? He must have known about these documents. Why did he continue the silence? The answer began to reveal itself when I explored Walter's old bedroom in the attic. I'd given the room a quick cleaning before, but only on the surface. This time, I looked closer. Behind the pine wardrobe, I noticed a patch of wall that looked newer than the rest. I knocked on it. It sounded hollow. Using a kitchen knife, I carefully pried at the edges of the plywood panel. It popped off easily, revealing another hidden compartment. Walter, son of Samuel, had his secrets too. Inside, there were no old dusty documents. This was a modern leather briefcase. When I opened it, I almost forgot to breathe. Inside were professionally printed geological reports, bearing the logo of a consulting firm from Tucson, and the dates on them weren't from the 1942. They were from the 1992, then 2005, and the most recent one was from 2018. Walter had continued his father's work, but he had done it silently and with much more modern technology. These weren't guesses, these were seismic surveys, core sample analyses, and 3D mapping reports. I skimmed through the complex technical jargon, trying to grasp the main idea from the conclusions. And then I found it, an executive summary written for a non-specialist client. Survey results confirm the existence of a high-grade turquoise deposit, known in the industry as Sleeping Beauty turquoise, at a relatively shallow depth. The main vein is estimated to be 1.5 miles in length, running northwest to southeast, directly beneath the main house and workshop area. Estimated reserves are sufficient for a commercial mining operation of at least 20 years. The current market value of the raw, unmined reserves is estimated at approximately $15 million. $15 million. I had to read the number 3 times. I sat down hard on the bed, the briefcase tumbling to the floor, papers scattering around me. $15 million. For all those years we'd worried about medical bills, about the mortgage, about Kevin's college tuition, we had been sitting on a fortune. Walter knew. He knew all along. Why? Why would he hide this from me? The shock quickly gave way to a sting of pain, a betrayal more subtle and somehow deeper than what Kevin and Tiffany had done. At least their actions came from a place of simple, ugly greed. But Walter? He had let me live with all that needless worry for all those years? For what? I rummaged through the briefcase, desperate for an explanation, and I found it at the very bottom in a separate envelope. Inside were 2 things. The first was a partnership proposal from Sedona Jewels, one of the most prestigious high-end jewelry brands in the Southwest, dated just 6 months before Walter passed away. They were offering an exclusive contract to mine and develop a product line from his Sleeping Beauty turquoise deposit. They offered an upfront figure that made my head spin. Walter had never replied to the letter. The second thing, the thing that broke my heart and then somehow put it back together again, was a handwritten letter. It was Walter's handwriting. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means I never got the chance to tell you myself, and for that I am so sorry. I'm sorry for keeping this secret for so long. I've known about the value of Dusty Creek since I was a young man. I found my father's papers. At first I just wanted to keep it as a piece of family history, a story to tell. But then, as Kevin grew up, and when he brought Tiffany home, I started to see a shadow in our future. Tiffany isn't like you. She doesn't see the beauty in a rough stone, she only sees its cash value. Her greed has no bottom, and Kevin, our boy, is too weak to stand up to her influence. I was afraid, Clara. I was afraid that if I revealed this secret, it wouldn't bring happiness. It would destroy our family. It would turn our son into a man we wouldn't recognize. It would turn my father's legacy into a gold rush for others to exploit. So I waited. I kept researching, confirming its value, getting everything in order. My plan was to tell you when we retired. We would decide, together, what to do. Maybe we'd do some small-scale mining, just enough to give you the best stones in the world for your work. Maybe we'd set up a conservation trust. It would have been our project. But the sickness, it came on too fast. I ran out of time. That will, Clara. It was a test, a painful one, I know. I gave Kevin and Tiffany everything they thought they wanted, the money, the tangible assets, and I gave you the only thing of real value, disguised in rags. I bet on their greed, and I bet on your resilience. I knew you would be hurt, but I also know you are so much stronger than you think. You have the heart of an artist and the patience of a geologist. You would find the truth. And when you did, Clara, this would be your legacy. Not mine, not Samuel's, but yours. The decision is all yours. Use it wisely. Build something beautiful with it, something that lasts, just like the jewelry you make. Don't let them ruin it, and don't let them ruin you. All my love, forever, Walter. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the last few lines of ink. The sting of betrayal was gone, replaced by a deep, aching understanding and a love that felt even bigger than before. This wasn't a deception. It was the ultimate act of protection. It was an intricate game of chess Walter had set up to protect me, and to protect his family's legacy from his own son's greed. He had trusted me. He had trusted my intelligence, my strength, my very soul. That night, for the first time since Walter died, I didn't feel alone. I felt his presence everywhere, in the whisper of the wind through the pine trees, in the silver moonlight that bathed the valley, and in the weight of the papers on my table. I wasn't a discarded widow anymore. I was the heir to a secret, the keeper of a key. Kevin and Tiffany thought they had pushed me to the edge of the world. They had no idea they had just handed me the power to remake it. The sunrise at Dusty Creek is always a spectacular sight. The sun climbs slowly from behind the San Francisco peaks, painting the sky in shades of rose and violet, chasing away the high desert chill. Before, I'd watch it with a heavy heart, mourning the mornings Walter was no longer there to share it with me. But the morning after I read his letter, everything was different. I stood on the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in my hands, and I didn't see loss. I saw a promise. That brilliant sky wasn't a farewell to a day that was gone, but a welcome to a new chapter just beginning. Walter's letter had changed everything. It wasn't just an explanation, it was a manual, a transfer of power. The chaos in my mind had settled, replaced by a cool, sharp clarity. I knew what I had, and more importantly, I knew what I had to do. Walter had bet on my resilience, and I was not about to let him down. I spent the next week not cleaning or grieving, but studying. I turned the old kitchen table into my command center. Samuel's and Walter's documents were organized scientifically. I read and reread every geological report, highlighting terms I didn't understand and looking them up online. My old laptop got more of a workout than it had in years. I learned about mineral laws in Arizona, about land lease agreements, about the international market price for Sleeping Beauty turquoise. I read up on Sedona Jewels, studying their business philosophy and their product lines. Knowledge is power, Walter used to say, and as I started to fill in the gaps in my own knowledge, I could feel that power coursing through me. The fear and helplessness began to evaporate, replaced by a quiet confidence. I wasn't an abandoned old woman anymore. I was the owner of a unique geological asset. I was a potential business partner that major companies would have to take seriously. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. Walter had left me the map and the compass, but to navigate the jungle of legal and business traps ahead, I needed a professional guide. I couldn't trust Mr. Davies, the lawyer who had executed that bitter will. He was likely in Kevin and Tiffany's pocket. I needed someone who was mine, someone who wasn't just skilled, but empathetic and trustworthy. I remembered a name Walter had mentioned a few years back, in a casual conversation. If you ever need a lawyer who's a real bulldog, someone who isn't afraid to go up against the big boys, you look up Patricia Wells. Patricia Wells. I looked her up. She was a lawyer in Phoenix specializing in resource and mineral law, famous for representing small landowners in disputes with large corporations. Her picture on the firm's website showed a woman in her 50s with a sharp, stylish haircut and a direct, intelligent gaze. She was exactly who I needed. Making that first call to Patricia's office was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I was used to being a quiet artisan, not a businesswoman making high-stakes calls. I had written down what I needed to say, and my voice trembled when the secretary answered. But when I was put through to Patricia, my nervousness melted away. Her voice was warm but firm. She listened to my story patiently, without interruption, only occasionally asking short, pointed questions. "Mrs. Morrison," she said after I had finished, "your story is incredible. I'm very sorry for your loss, and for the way your children have treated you. Bring every document you have to my office next Monday. We have a lot of work to do." The drive to Phoenix this time was completely different. I didn't feel lost or afraid. I drove with a clear purpose. Patricia's office wasn't flashy like Mr. Davies. It was more practical and efficient, with towering stacks of files and law books. Patricia Wells was even more impressive in person. She had a powerful energy, a firm handshake, and a smile that immediately put you at ease. We sat in her conference room for 4 straight hours. I laid out everything on the table: Samuel's old notes, Walter's modern reports, his letter, and the offer from Sedona Jewels. Patricia examined every single page with the focus of a surgeon studying a patient's chart. She read quickly, her eyes flying across the pages, but I knew that not a single detail was escaping her notice. Occasionally, she would give a small nod or a slight frown. "Your Walter was a very careful man," she said, finally looking up and pushing her glasses onto her forehead, "and he loved you very, very much." Setting up that trust and transferring the mineral rights into it was a stroke of genius. Legally, Kevin and Tiffany have zero claim to what's under the ground at that ranch. Then she paused, her eyes fixed on an old plat map, a copy from Walter's files. She squinted at it, then pulled another map from one of her drawers, a more modern zoning map. She laid them side by side, using a ruler to compare them. "Well now, that's interesting," she murmured. She looked at me, and there was a definite twinkle in her eye. "Clara, there's a detail here that I think even Walter might have missed. Or maybe, just maybe, he left it for you as an ace up your sleeve." "What is it?" I asked, my heart quickening. "When Walter subdivided the property to build your son's house," Patricia explained, pointing at the map, "he performed a legal action called a surface severance. It means he transferred the ownership of the surface of that lot to Kevin. But he forgot to file the corresponding paperwork to sever the mineral rights below. Under Arizona law, in a case like this, the mineral rights automatically remain with the parent parcel of land." She paused, letting the full weight of her words sink in. "To put it simply," she continued, "Kevin and Tiffany own their house and their garden, but your trust, the Clara's Legacy Trust, owns the entire multi-million-dollar turquoise and silver deposit that's sitting directly underneath their living room." I sat there, stunned. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was a feeling of absolute power. Walter hadn't just left me a shield to defend myself, he'd handed me a very sharp sword. So what does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Patricia smiled. "It means we are holding all the cards, Clara. We could force them to relocate so we can begin mining operations. We could sue them for building on a mineral asset without permission. Or we could do nothing and just keep it as our ace in the hole." "I see," I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind, clear and sharp. "For now, we do nothing. We'll keep that ace in our back pocket until the time is right." "A wise decision." Patricia nodded in approval. "So what's our next move? Do you want to reach out to Sedona Jewels?" "Yes," I replied. but not yet. I'm not ready. Before I face them, I need to truly understand my own legacy. I don't want to just be a landowner signing a contract. I want to be a partner. Together, we mapped out a plan of action. Step 1 was to formally activate the trust, transferring all the necessary accounts and finalizing the legal paperwork. Patricia would handle that. Step 2, and this was my part, was to delve deeper into the artistic and craft side of this inheritance. I returned to Dusty Creek with a completely new spirit. I was no longer an archaeologist searching the past. I was a strategist preparing for the future. I spent my time in the workshop, but not making small, familiar pieces. I took out the raw turquoise stones Walter had collected, stones I had previously only seen as mementos. Now, I saw them with new eyes. I studied their color, their matrix, their hardness. I remembered what Walter had taught me about how to spot a high-quality stone. I began sketching new designs, not the delicate little trinkets I used to make, but bold, unique statement pieces worthy of the Sleeping Beauty name. I wanted to create something only I could make, a fusion of Walter's geological legacy and my own artistic soul. I worked day and night, losing all track of time. My hands, already calloused from years of work, found their purpose again. Every cut, every grind, every polish was an act of self-affirmation. I wasn't just making jewelry anymore. I was forging my weapons. And in the quiet of my workshop, with the hum of the grinder and the smell of metal in the air, I felt more at peace than I had in a very long time. The following weeks at Dusty Creek passed in an almost deceptive calm. On the surface, nothing in my life had changed. I still woke with the sun, drank my coffee on the porch, and spent most of my days in the workshop. Any neighbor who might have happened to drive by would have only seen an old widow, filling her empty days with familiar manual work. They couldn't see the wheels turning in my head, couldn't hear the sound of a plan taking shape, as sharp and cold as a newly honed blade. Patricia and I were on the phone or emailing back and forth constantly. She handled all the legal paperwork swiftly, and more importantly, quietly. The Clara's Legacy Trust was now fully active, and I, Clara Morrison, a 72-year-old jewelry maker, was officially its president and sole CEO. Now that title always sounded a bit too big for its britches, a little foreign, but every time I saw it on a document, I felt a quiet surge of strength take root inside me. While Patricia was wrangling the law, I was focusing on our product. I didn't just design, I began to create. I picked out the 3 most beautiful raw, Sleeping Beauty turquoise stones from the collection Walter had left behind. They weren't huge, but their color was something else, entirely a pure, cloudless sky blue, without a hint of green, exactly like its legendary name suggested. Under the lights of my workshop, they looked like they held the entire Arizona sky right inside them. I worked with a focus I hadn't felt in a long, long time. My hands, though wrinkled with age, still had their steadiness, their skill. I didn't go for complicated designs. Instead, I chose a minimalist style, something that would celebrate the stone's natural beauty. 1 pendant, a pair of earrings, and a ring. I forged the sterling silver myself, shaping it into soft curves that wrapped around the gems like a river cradling precious stones. I wasn't just making jewelry, I was telling a story of earth and sky, of legacy and rebirth. When the 3 pieces were finished, I laid them out on a piece of black velvet. They glowed with a soft blue light, a beauty that was both innocent and powerful. They weren't just pieces of jewelry, they were messengers. They were the bait. My plan was simple. Tiffany's greed was a wild animal, and to lure it out of its den, I needed a piece of meat that smelled too good to resist. Scottsdale and Flagstaff, for all the miles between them, are close neighbors in the small world of the wealthy and the high-end art dealers. Gossip is its own kind of currency in that world, and I was about to put a very rare coin into circulation. I chose my target carefully. A man named Mr. Abernathy, the owner of a well-known antiques and gemstone shop in Flagstaff's historic downtown Turquoise Trail Treasures. He was a respected expert, but more importantly, he was a man who loved to talk. He had a network that stretched from the wealthy collectors in Sedona to the fast-moving real estate brokers in Scottsdale, a circle I was sure Tiffany moved in. On a Thursday morning, I put on my best dress, a simple but elegant beige linen number. I put on a little makeup and pinned my hair up neatly. I wanted to look the part of a graceful, slightly naive widow, not as sharp as a tax strategist. I placed the 3 pieces of jewelry in an old velvet-lined wooden box and drove into town. Mr. Abernathy's shop was a cozy space that smelled of cedar and old leather. Glass cases were filled with Native American artifacts, from antique pottery to exquisite silver and turquoise necklaces. Mr. Abernathy's of Native American artifacts. Abernathy himself, a portly man with a silver mustache and half-moon glasses, was polishing a silver belt buckle. He looked up when the bell on the door chimed, a professional smile on his face. "Good morning, madam. How may I help you?" "Good morning, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice soft. "My name is Clara Morrison. My late husband was Walter Morrison. Perhaps you knew of him." Mr. Abernathy's eyes lit up. "Walter Morrison? Of course. A legend in the geology world. I had the honor of speaking with him a few times. A brilliant mind. My condolences on his passing, ma'am. A great loss." His genuine respect for Walter warmed my heart. "Thank you," I said. "Actually, I'm here today about something related to him." I slowly opened the wooden box and placed it on the glass counter. The light from the window streamed in, setting the 3 turquoise stones ablaze. Mr. Abernathy drew in a sharp breath. He took his glasses off, then put them back on, as if he couldn't believe his own eyes. He reached for a jeweler's loupe and carefully, reverently, examined each piece. The silence stretched on. I could hear the ticking of an old grandfather clock in the corner. "Good heavens," he finally breathed, his voice full of awe. This is Sleeping Beauty, the purest grade. I haven't seen stones with this color in almost 20 years. They're practically extinct. Where on earth did you find these, Mrs. Morrison?" I gave him a sheepish little smile, as if I were just as confused as he was. "Well, I'm not really sure, Mr. Abernathy. I found a few raw stones while cleaning out my husband's old workshop on our ranch, Dusty Creek. He had a small collection. I'm just an amateur craftsman, so I tried making them into something to keep my hands busy. I have no idea what they're worth." "Amateur?" he repeated, looking at me with disbelief. "My dear lady, this is the work of a master. The simplicity of the design only enhances the stone's perfection. It's extraordinary." "You really think so?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Walter always used to say that old land at Dusty Creek held more surprises than you'd think. I just figured it was his way of trying to make me feel better about the place. I had planted the seed. Now it was time to water it. In fact," I continued, "I was thinking of selling them. I could use a little extra money to fix up the ranch. Could you possibly give me an estimate of their value?" Mr. Abernathy put the loupe back to his eye. He weighed them, examined every detail. "It's difficult to say exactly, ma'am. With this quality of stone and this level of craftsmanship, they're one-of-a-kind pieces. But I can tell you that, as a set, at auction, this would easily fetch a price well into the 6 figures. I feigned a dramatic gasp. 6 figures? For these 3 little pieces? I can't believe it." "You had better believe it, ma'am," he said firmly. "And if you truly have more rough stones like this, well, you're sitting on a gold mine, Mrs. Morrison, a blue gold mine." I thanked Mr. Abernathy, telling him I needed time to think. I didn't sell them to him, didn't leave them on consignment. I just left my phone number. "If you happen to hear of any truly serious collectors," I said, as if it were an afterthought, "do let me know." I left the shop, leaving Mr. Abernathy in a state of high excitement with an unbelievable story to tell. I knew, as sure as the sun would set, that the tale of the Morrison widow and the forgotten turquoise treasure would start making its way through the gemstone grapevine. And from there, it was only a matter of time before it reached Tiffany's ever-attentive ears. On the way home, I didn't feel a shred of guilt for the story I'd spun. This wasn't lying, this was storytelling, and in this fight, a good story was my most powerful weapon. I got back to the ranch as the afternoon sun was slanting low. I put the 3 pieces of jewelry back in their box and tucked them away. Their mission was complete. Now all I had to do was wait. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number from Scottsdale. I smiled. I let it ring a few times before picking up. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm. "Mom? Mother Clara? It's me, Kevin." He sounded tense. Are you doing okay? It's been a while." "Kevin? "It's me," I replied, my tone even, with just enough distance to make him squirm. I intentionally let a beat of silence hang in the air, forcing him to be the one to fill it. I was sitting on my porch, holding a book on the history of Navajo art, but my mind was completely focused on the call. "Yeah, sorry I haven't called," he stammered. "Work's been crazy. Tiffany and we were just wondering how you were settling in up there. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I said simply. "It's very quiet." Another pause. I could hear his breathing on the other end, and the faint, coaching whisper of Tiffany in the background. She was clearly right there beside him, feeding him his lines. "Oh, good," Kevin continued, flustered. "So, I heard something. A friend of mine in real estate. He knows an antiques dealer up in Flagstaff. They said you have some valuable jewelry." "Oh, really?" I replied, my voice still a mask of innocent surprise. "They must be talking about those little pieces I just made. Just for fun, you know." "For fun?" Kevin's voice went up an octave. "They said it could be worth hundreds of thou." He stopped abruptly, probably from a sharp nudge from Tiffany. "I mean, that they're very beautiful. Could you maybe send me a picture?" "What for, Kevin?" I asked directly, giving him no room to maneuver. "Since when are you interested in my little trinkets?" I heard him swallow hard. "No, it's not like that, Mom. I'm just curious. I'm worried you might get taken advantage of. You don't know the market prices." "Thank you for your concern," I said with a sliver of irony I knew he'd catch. "But I think I can manage. Walter taught me a thing or two about stones after all." I heard Tiffany hiss something angrily in the background. The call ended quickly after a few more awkward pleasantries. I set the phone down on the table, a small smile playing on my lips. The fish had taken the bait. Now, it was time to slowly reel in the line. That first call was just the opening shot. Over the next week, my phone became their personal torture device. They called constantly. First Kevin, then Tiffany. Their tone changed daily, like a chart mapping their rising desperation. At first, it was all sugar and fake kindness. Tiffany called, her voice chirping like a songbird. "Dearest Mother Clara, I was just looking at new kitchen designs, and I thought, why don't you come down for the weekend? I'll make that pot roast you love." The invitation was so phony it was nauseating. I politely declined, saying I was busy with my little project in the workshop. When sweetness didn't work, they switched to pulling on the family heartstrings. Kevin called, his voice laced with sadness. "Mom, the kids miss you. Amy keeps asking why Grandma doesn't visit. Don't you want to see your grandchildren?" It was a low blow, aimed right at my weakest spot. My heart ached at the thought of my grandbabies, but I knew this was all part of the act. I replied that I missed them terribly too, but my health had been a bit delicate, and I needed the rest and fresh air. Then came the probing phase, the shameless attempts to dig for information. Tiffany called, her tone breezy and casual. "I was talking to a jewelry expert. He said that Sleeping Beauty turquoise is incredibly rare now. If you have a lot of the rough stone, that could be a real fortune. Do you need help finding a reputable appraiser in Scottsdale?" "That's sweet of you, dear, but no thank you," I replied gently. "I've already spoken to a few interested parties. They seem very enthusiastic." I left it vague on purpose, letting her imagination run wild. The more I pushed them away, the more frantic they became. The frequency of the calls ramped up. One day, I got more than a dozen calls and texts. Their tone began to shift from pleading to demanding, and then to outright frustration. "Mom, why aren't you answering?" Kevin snapped in a voicemail. "We're just trying to help you. What are you hiding from us?" "Clara, I think we need to have a frank discussion," Tiffany said in another call, all the sweetness gone from her voice, replaced by cold command. "This is a family asset. You can't just make these decisions on your own." A family asset. The irony was rich. Just a few weeks ago, they treated me and this ranch like something to be thrown out with the trash. I decided it was time to turn up the heat. I called Mr. Abernathy back. "Good morning, Mr. Abernathy," I said. "I've been thinking about what you said. I think I'm ready to part with one of the pieces. The ring, perhaps. Do you know of any truly serious collectors?" I knew, with absolute certainty that news of Mrs. Morrison is starting to sell the treasure would reach Tiffany within hours, and I was right. That evening, all hell broke loose. My phone began ringing and did not stop. I didn't answer. I just put it on silent and watched the screen light up with the familiar names. Kevin, Tiffany, Kevin Mobile, Tiffany Cell. They were calling from every phone they owned. Their frenzy was almost a physical thing. It seemed to travel through the airwaves and press in on my quiet little house. I sat in my living room, calmly sipping chamomile tea and reading my book, glancing every so often at the phone's frantic, flashing screen. I counted. 10 calls. 20. 30. The voicemails started piling up. Kevin's voice grew more and more panicked, begging me to pick up. Tiffany's was filled with thinly veiled threats. Clara, if you don't call me back immediately, we are driving up there. Mom, what the hell are you doing? This is a life-changing opportunity for the whole family. Don't you dare ruin it. By midnight, when I was getting ready for bed, I checked the phone. 62 missed calls, 27 voicemails, a new record for desperation. I smiled. The wild animal was completely out of control. It was roaring and pacing in the cage of its own greed. The bait had worked, the trap was set. Now it was time for the face-to-face meeting. I knew they would come tomorrow, and I would be ready. The next morning I woke up early, but I didn't rush. I took my time, brewing a fresh pot of mint tea from the little herb garden I'd replanted. I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies, letting the warm, comforting scent fill the house. I put on a soft cashmere sweater the color of the sky, the color of Sleeping Beauty turquoise, and a simple silver necklace I'd made for myself years ago. I wanted to look calm, centered, like a queen preparing to receive messengers begging for favors in her own domain. I arranged the living room. I put a vase of freshly picked wildflowers on the table. I started a small fire in the hearth, not because it was cold, but for the warm, intimate atmosphere it created. Everything had to be perfect. Every detail was part of the stage play, designed to magnify the contrast between my peace and their chaos. Around 10 in the morning, I heard the sound of a familiar engine. A sleek black luxury SUV was crawling up the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust behind it. They were here. I took a deep breath and caught my reflection in the window pane. The woman looking back at me wasn't frightened or heartbroken anymore. Her eyes were calm, clear as glass, but deep down inside them, well, there was a will of iron. The black SUV crunched to a halt in front of the porch. The engine gave one last growl before cutting out, leaving a tense silence hanging over the property. The red Arizona dust still hung in the air like a thin curtain. The car door flew open. Kevin practically fell out, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot from worry and lack of sleep. His expensive business suit was wrinkled and dusty, looking sorely out of place against the rustic backdrop of the ranch. He looked at me with a complicated expression, a mix of anger, pleading, and a flicker of shame. Tiffany got out of the driver's side, more slowly, more deliberately. She wore a pair of oversized sunglasses that hid most of her face, but I could still see the tight set of her jaw. She was dressed in a designer tracksuit, a pathetic attempt to look casual and at ease that failed miserably. Her entire body radiated discomfort, as if she'd been forced to step onto contaminated ground. She swept her eyes over the ranch, from the old windmill to the creaky porch, and that familiar, disdainful smirk appeared, if only for a second. "Mom," Kevin said, his voice hoarse. "We called you. Why didn't you answer?" "I needed the quiet, Kevin," I replied softly, a gentle smile fixed on my face. "It's not like Scottsdale up here. I'm getting used to a slower pace of life. Come on in, you two. You must be tired after that long drive." I turned and walked inside without waiting for a reply. I knew they would follow. Curiosity and greed would pull them in like an irresistible magnetic force. They stepped into the living room, and I saw a flicker of surprise on both their faces. The room wasn't the dilapidated mess they had imagined. On the contrary, it was clean, tidy, and warm. The morning sun streamed through sparkling clean windows, lighting up the freshly polished wood floors. A fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth. The scent of oatmeal cookies and mint tea hung in the air. This wasn't a place of exile, it was a sanctuary. And that contrast, folks, that was my first little psychological volley. I wasn't miserable, I was thriving. "Sit down," I said. gesturing to two armchairs facing each other across a low coffee table. I took the sofa, placing myself as the host, the one in control of the conversation. "Would you like some tea?" I picked the mint from the garden myself. Tiffany took off her sunglasses, revealing sharp, assessing eyes. She didn't sit down right away, but walked around the room, her long fingers gliding over the surface of an old wooden cabinet, checking for dust. "It's cozy, I suppose," she commented, her tone condescending, as if praising a child's effort. "Thank you," I said. "I've been fixing things up myself. It gives me something to do." Kevin plopped into a chair, looking impatient. "Mom, we don't have time for this. We need to talk, seriously." "Oh, I thought we were talking," I replied, calmly pouring tea into 3 antique porcelain cups I'd found in the kitchen cupboard. The steam rose, carrying a soothing aroma. "I thought you came all this way to visit me." Tiffany finally sat, placing her designer handbag carefully on the floor beside her. She didn't touch her teacup. "Clara, we know," she said, getting straight to the point, no pretense. "About the turquoise, about what it's worth." "Is that so?" I took a sip of tea, looking at her over the rim of the cup. "It's a small world, isn't it, dear? Don't you play innocent with us." Kevin nearly shouted, losing his usual composure. "You knew it was worth a fortune. Why did you hide it from us? What are you planning to do? Sell it? Keep it all for yourself?" I set my cup down slowly on its saucer, the small clink of porcelain echoing in the quiet room. I looked my son directly in the eye, my gaze no longer gentle, but sharp and direct. "Kevin," I said, my voice low and clear without a single tremor, "when you two threw me out of my own home, did you think about sharing with me then? When you left me with a ranch you considered worthless, did you think about family? And Tiffany," I turned to her, "when you called my life's work little trinkets, did you ever imagine I might find a fortune in them?" They were both stunned into silence. My words were precise scalpels, cutting straight to the heart of their hypocrisy. Tiffany was the first to recover. She let out a short, dry, artificial laugh. "Oh, I see. You're sulking. You want revenge. How childish, Clara. We're all adults here. Let's be practical." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, shifting into her negotiator's voice. "Look, we admit there was a misunderstanding. We were all under a lot of stress after Walter's death. But now is not the time to dredge up the past. The future is what's important. You're sitting on a gold mine, but you have no idea how to manage it. You'll be cheated by every shark out there. You need us?" she stressed. "Kevin has the business experience. I'm the expert in real estate and negotiations. We'd be the perfect team. We'll manage this project together." "A team?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "And what would my role be in this team?" "You'd be an important part, of course." Kevin jumped in quickly, as if afraid of what Tiffany might say. You'd be the artistic consultant. You could keep making your jewelry." And then, Tiffany delivered what she thought was the final blow, an offer she was certain that I, a lonely, pathetic old woman, could never refuse. "Listen, here's my plan," she said, her voice dripping with confidence and condescension. "We'll form a new company. Kevin and I will hold the controlling shares to manage operations. You'll get a small percentage. We'll sell this ranch to a major mining corporation, take a lump sum payment, quick, clean, and efficient. Then, you can move down to Scottsdale with us." She paused, letting the offer hang in the air for effect. "We'll build you a beautiful, comfortable studio apartment over the garage. You'll have your own space, but you'll still be close to the grandkids. You won't have to be lonely anymore. Isn't that what's best for everyone?" An apartment over the garage. After all of it, after discovering I was in possession of an asset worth tens of millions of dollars, the best they could offer me was an apartment over the garage. The offer wasn't just an insult, it laid their whole character bare. They didn't want me. They didn't want my presence in their lives. They just wanted my money. And they wanted to tuck me away in a little corner where I wouldn't bother their perfect world while they spent the fortune that I owned. Silence filled the room. The fire still crackled, the smell of cookies still lingered, but the air had gone ice cold. I looked at them, from Kevin to Tiffany. I saw the raw greed in their eyes, the poorly hidden impatience. They were waiting for my answer, certain that a widowed old woman, after weeks of isolation, would leap at any chance to be accepted back into the family. And in that moment, I no longer felt anger, just a profound pity. Pity for my son, who had lost his own soul. Pity for my daughter-in-law, who had everything and yet was terrifyingly empty. I took a deep breath. It was time to bring the curtain down on this play and begin a new one they could never have imagined. I smiled, a real smile this time, but one that sent a chill down their spines. "Tiffany, Kevin," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "Your offer is interesting, but before I make my decision, there are a few things I think you ought to see." The cozy living room seemed to hold its breath. The crackle of the fire and the creak of the floorboards under my feet were the only sounds that broke the heavy silence. Kevin and Tiffany's eyes followed my every move, their initial confidence replaced by a flicker of confusion, an unnamed unease. They were expecting me to pull out an old photo album, some memento to appeal to their sense of family. They had no idea that what I was about to put on the table wasn't the past, but their own bleak future. I opened the doors of an old mahogany cabinet. The scent of mothballs and pine, the smell of time itself wafted out. Inside, instead of stacks of tablecloths or old china, sat two neatly arranged leather-bound portfolios. I picked them up, feeling their weight in my hands, the weight of truth, of justice, and of a plan calculated down to the last detail. I walked back and placed the two portfolios on the coffee table, right between the now cold cups of mint tea. The soft thud of the leather hitting the wood sounded final. I said, my voice still perfectly calm. "Before we discuss the apartment over the garage, we should review a few documents, just to make sure everyone is on the same page." I pushed the first portfolio toward them. It was navy blue leather, with gold embossed letters on the cover, "The Clara's Legacy Trust." Tiffany narrowed her eyes, a look of confusion on her face. She glanced at Kevin, then reluctantly opened the cover. Kevin leaned forward, curious. I gave them a few moments. I watched their expressions change as they scanned the pages, confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror. They saw the trust's articles of incorporation, signed by Walter 5 years prior. They saw the legal deeds transferring the full mineral rights of the Dusty Creek Ranch, including all turquoise, silver, and all other subterranean resources, to that trust. And they saw the final page, the one that named me, Clara Morrison, as the sole trustee and beneficiary, with absolute and total authority over all its operations. What the hell is this?" Kevin stammered, looking up, his face pale. "A trust? Why didn't Dad ever tell me?" "Because it wasn't for you, Kevin," I replied softly. "It was for me." Walter knew. He knew that without this protection, you too would turn this family's legacy into a commodity to be sold off to the highest bidder. Tiffany slammed the portfolio shut. "This is ridiculous. It's not legal. The will was read. The ranch is yours, but anything of value found on it has to be reconsidered. We'll sue." "Oh, please do," I smiled, a smile that didn't waver. "My lawyer, Patricia Wells, would be delighted to speak with yours. She says this case will be a textbook example of proper estate planning, but perhaps—" I paused, looking directly at Tiffany. "You should look at the second portfolio before you make that call." I slowly pushed the second portfolio across the table. This one was crimson red. This time, Tiffany hesitated. Her hand trembled slightly as it touched the leather. She opened it, and I knew exactly what she would see on the very first page. It was a large plat map of their Scottsdale neighborhood, with the house at 85 Silverleaf Drive circled in red ink. Attached to it was a 3-page legal report prepared by Patricia, filled with underlined and highlighted professional terms. I didn't need to explain. I could see the understanding dawning on Tiffany's face, the real estate expert. I watched her color go from pale to ashen. She flipped frantically through the pages, her eyes scanning the clauses about surface rights versus unsevered mineral rights. Kevin, completely lost, looked at his wife in confusion. "What is it, Tiff? What is that?" Tiffany didn't answer him. She lifted her head and stared at me. For the first time since I had met her, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. The arrogance, the disdain, it was all gone, replaced by the panic of a predator who realizes it has just walked into a trap. "No," she whispered, her voice raspy. "It's not possible." "Oh, but it is, Tiffany. I said, my voice no longer soft, but now hard and cold as steel. When Walter subdivided the land for you, he only gave you the surface rights. He forgot to sever the mineral rights. Which means that your beautiful $2.5 million house, your swimming pool, that garden you're so proud of, it's all built on property that belongs to my trust. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace, feeling its warmth. I turned back to face them, now in the position of complete power, of total control. And here are your options, I said, holding up my fingers one by one. 1. My trust, as the legal owner of the mineral deposit beneath your house, will begin legal proceedings to have you remove any and all structures that impede geological surveying and potential mining operations. That means you will have to demolish your own home. Kevin looked like he was about to faint. 2, I continued, giving them no time to react. You can refuse, in which case we will see you in court. And Patricia tells me that, with this open and shut case, we will not only win, but we can also sue you for damages for illegally building on our asset. You will be left with nothing. I paused, locking eyes with Tiffany. And the final option, which I think is a rather generous one under the circumstances. My trust is willing to sell you the mineral rights underneath the property at 85 Silverleaf Drive. A flicker of hope appeared in Kevin's eyes. Sell them? For how much? I smiled, a cold, thin smile. The price is $3 million. In cash. You have 90 days. Otherwise, the offer is withdrawn, and we go back to options 1 and 2. Silence. Even the crackling fire seemed to have died down. $3 million. I knew they didn't have it. The $2.5 million they inherited was mostly tied up in stocks and long-term investments. To get $3 million in cash in 90 days, they would have to sell everything, and likely try to mortgage the very house that was in dispute, something no bank would ever approve. I had them backed into a corner. I had used the very law, the very calculation they worshipped, to build a cage with no escape. Mom, you can't do this to us, Kevin finally whispered, his voice weak and pleading. I'm your son. Yes, you are, I replied, turning to him. You are my son, and that is why I am teaching you a lesson that Walter and I should have taught you a long time ago. A lesson about consequences, about respect, and about the price of greed. I walked back to the table, picked up the 2 portfolios, and placed them neatly back in the cabinet. I believe our conversation is over, I said, my voice calm once more. You have 90 days. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some jewelry to finish. I didn't look at them again. I walked straight toward my workshop out back, leaving them sitting there in the living room, in the ruins of their perfect plan. I could hear Tiffany begin to sob, not tears of sorrow, but of rage and helplessness. Then came the sound of Kevin trying clumsily to comfort her. When I closed the workshop door behind me, I took a long, deep breath. The air inside smelled of metal and machine oil, a scent that was familiar and comforting. I switched on my desk lamp, and its warm yellow light fell on my unfinished work. The play was over. The chess match was won. I didn't feel a rush of glee. I just felt a quiet sense of relief, a feeling that justice, in its own way, had been served. I picked up a piece of raw turquoise, feeling its cool, smooth surface in the palm of my hand. Walter had left me an invaluable legacy. In the days following that earth-shattering confrontation, the Dusty Creek Ranch returned to its usual quiet, but this time, the silence didn't feel like loneliness or neglect. It was the peace of a battlefield after the fight is over, when the smoke has cleared and the victor can finally breathe the fresh air of a new future. I received no calls from Kevin or Tiffany. Their silence was more eloquent than the 62 missed calls had ever been. I could imagine the chaos unfolding in their luxury home in Scottsdale, the arguments, the accusations, the sleepless nights spent trying to find a way out of the trap. Patricia informed me that their lawyer had contacted her. It had been a short conversation full of empty bluster at first, which quickly turned to probing, and finally to silence when he realized just how airtight the legal walls Walter and Patricia had built really were. I refused to be drawn into their drama any longer. They had sown the wind, and now they would reap the whirlwind. My part in that story was over. It was time to start writing a new chapter, for myself. With a clear mind, I poured all my energy into the workshop. But I wasn't just making small pieces anymore. I was preparing for a major meeting. I had called Sedona Jewels. Mrs. Morrison, the voice of Julian Croft, the company's CEO, came over the phone, warm and full of respect. "We were so hoping we would hear from you. We were terribly sorry to hear of Walter's passing. He was a friend and a partner we valued immensely." "Thank you, Julian," I replied. "Walter had a great deal of respect for you and your company. That's why I'm calling today. I think it's time we talked about the proposal you sent him." We scheduled a meeting for the following week at their headquarters in Sedona, and I knew I couldn't go empty-handed. I had to show them I wasn't just the heir to a mine. I had to show them I was an artist, a creative partner with a vision. I worked like I had never worked before. I took out the very best of the Sleeping Beauty turquoise, the stones that Walter had treasured. Under the bright lights of my workshop, in the deep quiet of the Arizona night, I let my hands and my heart do the talking. I wasn't just making pieces of jewelry, I was breathing life into stories. I created a small collection, just 5 pieces, which I named Elena's Legacy. Each piece was inspired by an aspect of the tragic but powerful story of the woman I had never met. There was the Tears of the Valley necklace, with a single teardrop-shaped turquoise cradled in silver wires twisted like tree roots, symbolizing her deep love for this land. There were the Whispers of the Wind earrings, with small, exquisitely cut stones dangling from delicate silver chains, making the softest sound with every movement. And the centerpiece of the collection was the Heart of the Mountain bracelet, a bold piece featuring a large, almost raw turquoise stone, set on a wide silver cuff etched with the geological symbols I had copied from Samuel's book. Each piece was a fusion of raw, natural beauty and refined craftsmanship. They were unlike anything else on the market. They had a soul. While I was lost in my creative world, Kevin and Tiffany's empire was crumbling. Patricia kept me updated. They couldn't raise the $3 million. The bank had refused to refinance their mortgage after being discreetly informed by Patricia of the mineral rights dispute. The market value of their house plummeted. No one wanted to buy a property they could be kicked out of at any moment to make way for a mine. The financial strain exposed every crack in their marriage. I heard from Ruth Peterson, who still had her sources, that they were fighting constantly. Tiffany blamed Kevin for his weakness, for not forcing me to sign papers early on. Kevin blamed Tiffany for her greed, for pushing things too far. And then, the inevitable happened. About 2 months after our confrontation, I received a letter from Kevin's lawyer. It was a short, formal note informing me that he had filed for divorce. And he was requesting that I, as his mother, testify about the mental manipulation and financial pressure Tiffany had inflicted upon him. I read the letter, not with a sense of victory, but with a deep sadness. My son, even at the very end, couldn't take responsibility for himself. He was still looking for someone else to blame. I gave the letter to Patricia. "You can tell them," I said, "that I will not get involved in their personal affairs. My son is a grown man. He must face his own choices." The collapse was swift. Tiffany, her real estate career in a nosedive because of the scandal, agreed to sell the house at a rock-bottom price to a venture capital firm, the only buyer willing to take the risk. The money they got, after paying off the bank and the lawyers, was a fraction of what they'd had. They split what was left and went their separate ways. The empire built on sand had been washed away by a single, relentless wave. The day I drove to Sedona to meet with Sedona Jewels, I felt like I was driving toward the sunrise. I was no longer Clara Morrison, the cast-off widow. I was Clara Morrison, artist and businesswoman, the keeper of a legacy. The Sedona Jewels headquarters was a stunning piece of architecture that blended seamlessly into the majestic red rocks. Mr. Julian Croft and his team designers, gemologists, welcomed me with genuine warmth and respect. They had a professional presentation ready, with numbers, charts, and detailed business plans. But before they could begin, I said, "Mr. Croft, before we talk numbers, I'd like to show you something." I opened the velvet box I had brought with me. I placed the 5 pieces of the Elena's Legacy collection on the polished conference table. The room fell silent. Every eye was on the jewelry. Mr. Croft, a man who had spent his life working with the world's most beautiful gemstones, slowly rose from his chair, walked over, and leaned down to examine each piece. He didn't use a loupe. He just looked, with his heart. "Mrs. Morrison," he said after a long moment, his voice thick with emotion. This isn't just jewelry. This is art. This is a story. Walter told me you were a talented artist, but I had no idea. It's extraordinary. And right then, in that moment, I knew I had won. We didn't talk much more about a simple mining contract. Instead, we talked about a partnership where I wouldn't be a supplier of raw materials, but the creative director of an entirely new line, Dusty Creek by Clara Morrison. My trust would retain ownership of the mine, and we would only excavate it sustainably, selectively, ensuring a supply for exclusive, artistic pieces. I left Sedona that afternoon with a draft of a contract in my briefcase, a contract that went far beyond my wildest expectations. It didn't just give me financial security, it gave me a platform, a voice, and a validation of the talent I had almost buried. On the drive home, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery colors, I pulled over to the side of the road. I got out and just breathed in the clean desert air. I hadn't gotten revenge. I had simply taken back what was mine, my dignity, my craft, my future. And as I stood there, looking out toward the distant lights of the Dusty Creek Ranch, I knew that the real dawn was just beginning. The dawn of my land. A dawn built from precious stones. Acoustic guitar music swells slightly, then settles back down. 6 months after that fateful day in Sedona, life at the Dusty Creek Ranch had changed in the most wonderful ways, but not in the loud, flashy manner Tiffany might have imagined. There were no fleets of heavy trucks rumbling in and out, no giant open pits scarring the landscape. Instead, the change was quiet, tasteful, and respectful, much like how an artisan slowly polishes a rough stone to reveal the beauty within. Under my direction, and with the help of the best experts from Sedona Jewels, we began a small-scale, almost artisanal mining operation. We focused on just one section of the main vein, carefully selecting each piece of earth we moved, ensuring our impact on the land was minimal. My old workshop was expanded and upgraded into a state-of-the-art creative space, with the best tools money could buy, but it still kept its rustic soul. I even hired 2 talented young artisans, who shared my passion and respect for the craft, to work alongside me. Our first collection, Elena's Legacy, was launched at a prestigious art show in Santa Fe, and it created an absolute sensation. People were captivated not just by the legendary beauty of the Sleeping Beauty turquoise, but by the story behind it. Every piece sold came with a small card that told the story of Samuel and Elena, of a forgotten legacy, and of its rebirth. They weren't just luxury items, they were pieces of history. Money began to flow into the trust's account, numbers so large they sometimes still took my breath away. But the real joy wasn't the bank balance, it was what I could do with those resources. I established the Walter and Elena Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit to provide scholarships for students in geology and the native arts, and to fund cultural and environmental preservation projects here in Arizona. The legacy of Walter and Elena wasn't just in the ground anymore. It was being planted in the future. Tiffany disappeared from my life completely. After the divorce, she moved to California to try and restart her career. I'd hear whispers about her now and then, a life that still looked glamorous on social media, but was propped up by debt and fleeting relationships. She became a cautionary tale of how a person can have everything, but without empathy and gratitude, end up with nothing at all. And Kevin, my son, well, his story is a bit more complicated. After the divorce, he went through a real crisis. He lost his wife, his house, the social standing he had worked so hard to build. He hit rock bottom. And maybe, just maybe, it was only from the very bottom that he could finally see himself clearly. About 3 months later, late one afternoon, he drove up to the ranch, not in a luxury SUV, but in a dusty old pickup truck. He looked thinner, older. No more fancy suits, just worn jeans and a faded shirt. He didn't ask for money. He didn't offer a hollow apology. He just stood in front of me, his eyes red-rimmed, and said one simple sentence. Can you teach me how to work?" He wanted to start over, not as a business executive, but as an apprentice in my workshop. He wanted to learn about the stones, about the metal, about what it meant to create something beautiful with his own 2 hands. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for a trace of deceit, for some hidden angle, but I saw nothing but exhaustion, regret, and a genuine, desperate desire for redemption. And so, I nodded. The months that followed were not easy, for either of us. I didn't treat him like my son, I treated him like an apprentice. He did the hardest jobs, hauling rock, cleaning the shop, learning on the roughest grinding machines. His soft office worker hands quickly became calloused and scratched. I saw him get discouraged, saw him want to quit more than once. But he didn't. He stayed, he persevered. And slowly, I began to see glimpses of the boy I once knew, the patient, curious boy with a quiet appreciation for beauty. I taught him how to read the stones, how to feel the heart of a raw gem. I told him the stories of his grandfather Samuel and Elena, of his father Walter. I taught him about a legacy, not of money, but of passion and love. One afternoon, as we were working side by side, he suddenly stopped. He looked up at me, his eyes glistening. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice thick. "I was a fool. I let money and ambition blind me. I didn't protect you. I am so sorry." That was the apology I had been waiting for, not because I needed to hear it, but because he needed to say it. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. "The past is the past, Kevin. What's important is what you've learned. A legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you build, with your own hands and your own heart. Our relationship could never go back to the way it was, and perhaps that's for the best. It's no longer built on my one-sided sacrifice or his unconscious dependency. It's rebuilt on a new foundation of mutual respect, of understanding, and of a shared purpose." Kevin found his place, not as an heir, but as a steward of the legacy, handling the business and development side of the Dusty Creek by Clara Morrison brand. My grandchildren, Amy and Ben, are now regular weekend visitors to the ranch. Free from their mother's materialistic influence, they're discovering real joy here. They run through the hills, they learn to identify different types of rocks, and they spend hours in the workshop, mesmerized, watching their grandma and their dad turn dull stones into works of art. I see Walter's curiosity in Ben's eyes and my own steady hands in Amy's. The legacy continues. So now, as I sit on this porch and watch the sunset spill across the valley, I often think about this strange journey of mine. How life, at 72 years old, gave me a new beginning, and a valuable lesson I wanted to share with all of you. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've learned that the best revenge isn't about causing pain to those who hurt you. The best revenge is to live a brilliant life, a life where their existence no longer has any power over your happiness. I didn't destroy Kevin and Tiffany. They destroyed themselves with their own greed and selfishness. I simply refused to be their victim. I've learned that a woman's worth, especially an older woman's worth, isn't in her usefulness to others. It's not measured by the meals she cooks, the children she raises, or the quiet sacrifices she makes. Our worth is in our wisdom, our experience, the inner strength we've gathered over a lifetime. It's in our ability to turn pain into power and ashes into art. The real legacy I want to leave behind isn't a turquoise mine or a famous jewelry brand. It's my story. The story of a woman who was pushed to the edge, but instead of falling, found a treasure far greater than gemstones. She found her own voice and the power to write her own ending. I look out to the yard, where Kevin is pointing up at the night sky, showing his own children how to find Orion's belt, and I smile. Dusty Creek Ranch is no longer a place of forgetting. It has become a place of rebirth, a testament to the fact that even from the driest, most barren ground, the most beautiful things can grow. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and please, share your own stories and thoughts in the comments below. We all have a story worth telling.